What's your deepest, darkest secret? Story 1. In 1996, I was 6 years old and a friend told me that computer mouse balls were worth as much as gold. Stupidly, and with no plan, I stole one from the classroom computer. Our teacher got extremely angry and I got really scared I'd get caught. He had us all leave the room and go in one by one so that whoever stole it could anonymously put it back. I was too scared that somebody might see, so I didn't put it back. He exploded on us. The next day, I was going to try to secretly return it, but a kid randomly emptily confessed that he was the one who stole it, and his mom went to the store to buy a new one. He stood in front of the class with a written apology and everything. I should have taken a stand and said, "No, Kyle, you didn't steal it, I did." Shameful. Anyway, 28 years later, Kyle is a stripper at a gay nightclub. I have almost the exact same story, except it was when I was in an after-school program at the university in our city. I had, like a total idiot, accidentally tied my shoelaces together in such a way that nobody could untie them. This was right before we all were about to walk to the pool on campus. I lied through my teeth and said someone else had tied them together because I was embarrassed. The group had already left, but I was behind, trying to untie my shoes. Eventually, the students just asked one of the campus maintenance guys to drive me over on his golf cart. When I arrived at the pool, everyone was sitting on the bleachers and one of the students was grilling the group, saying that if the person who did it didn't fess up, nobody would get to go in the pool at all. One poor bastard decided it wasn't fair to have everyone else miss out and took the heat, which felt so crappy to me, but I was already in too deep to admit it. So he was sitting on the bleachers while everyone was swimming. But eventually, I guess one girl had the thought that I might have been lying and told the college kids. They confronted me and I kinda had to fess up. I sat on the bleachers the rest of the day. I lied a lot as a kid, and I realized later it often came from a place of survival instinct, as my dad was not the nicest person back then. I did something similar, but worse. It was 2006, and it was a telling day in my first grade class. And at one point I saw a toy in someone's open backpack, and when nobody was looking, quickly took it out of that person's bag and put it into another kid's bag. Eventually, the kid noticed it went missing and told the teacher, so she got upset and searched everyone's bag. The kid whose bag I put it in got searched and they found it. To this day, I still remember him pleading for his life, eyes bigger than his head, saying that he didn't do it. I don't remember the rest of what happened after or if he got in trouble, but to this day I still feel bad about it. I never said anything to anyone. I did a lot of impulsive crap like this as a kid that I don't understand why I did. I always felt bad immediately after. So yeah, I framed someone. If the person who I framed ever sees this, I'm so sorry. I have a very similar story from when I was a kid. When I was around 6 years old in school, the whole class got to make these clay ornaments that we could also paint. My teacher put them all out to dry on the windowsill, and during playtime, someone broke one of the ornaments in half. The girl who had made it was crying and confused as to why someone would break it. So after playtime finished and we were all sitting at our tables, our teacher was extremely upset and angry. She demanded someone confess. No one did. She then said, "If no one confesses, I will get the headmaster down here," who I was terrified of. The head teacher never liked me much. I was scared of the possibility of him coming down and giving us a stern talking to, and most likely he would have assumed it was me. So I remember just saying to my teacher, "It was me." I was never punished, but I remember the anxiety that was going through my head at the prospect of the head teacher coming down to give us a telling off. Looking back, maybe I shouldn't have done it, although I definitely took one for the team. Story 2. Live in the only major urban center in a very rural area, where there are all kinds of suburbs, road construction, gravel pits, etc. Whenever I see heavy equipment that doesn't get moved or is left unattended, I sneak into the worksite at night, climb into the always unlocked bulldozer or whatever the hell it is, and proceed to lay on the horn in the dead of night before scrambling away. It has been a decade since I started, and I think now I've honked the horns of just about every type of heavy machinery that has one. One night I was guarding this construction site in Tacoma, and some kids came wandering down the street as teens do on a Saturday night. They avoided my sight, but the street in front was being worked on by the city at the same time, so they had some bulldozers, backhoes, and front-end loaders parked out there. This kid, maybe 14 or so, goes to climb up into one of the bulldozers, and I slink out of the shadows 2 feet away from him to tell him no. He looked at me like I pumped a 12 gauge, fear and wonder in his eyes. How did my fat ass manage to Batman him at 0200? Because I am the night. Real talk, a lot of crap is just kids going, "What if I did this?" Most of us don't care. We're not super troopers, just don't break anything. and knock it off when we pop up and say boo. We did this too as kids, but we would take the keys out and throw them in the weeds. We also put rocks and clumps of dirt in the gas tanks. One kid somehow started a bulldozer, but we didn't know how to turn it off. I legit felt worried as the bulldozer was facing our neighborhood, so I ended up telling my dad. The bulldozer ended up running all night until it ran out of gas. I've worked maintenance for a couple of construction companies. The key thing is a major pain in the ass. Obviously, it's irresponsible for the machine operator to leave keys in the machine, but if the operator takes the keys with him and doesn't show up the next day, the sub may not have another key, and it causes such a minor headache. Newer machines don't have keys anymore. It's all keypads. Yeah, as a 12-year-old kid, we were very proud of ourselves. One of the richest schools in the city bought a strip of land that was nestled between our neighborhood and the highway. The land was previously owned by a farmer who left it as an open field for us to play in. He allowed us to use it as long as we didn't build any structures on it. Well, Summit Country Day School wanted to turn it into a sports complex, but specifically stated the neighborhood kids would be allowed to use it. That sounds awesome, right? Well, once they got approval, suddenly the facility would be strictly private. We all felt deceived, and besides a few signs we made stating Summit sucks, which made it on the news, what else is a kid going to do about getting bullied out of our neighborhood playground? So yeah, we just continued playing basketball and football in the street, where everyone parked their cars, and we had to dodge plenty of traffic. Story 3. I couldn't pick up the pieces after my divorce. Would go weeks without showering or brushing my teeth. I found my baby blanket from my youth in a trunk and wrapped it around myself that night. Best sleep I had in years. I have kept it in my bed since then. I am a 42-year-old man. Bro, that's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm 32 and my grandmother brought down my childhood blanket she made for me asking if I wanted it. I said no at first, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day when I pulled up to work, I don't know what finally did it, but I broke down sobbing. I was an absolute blubbering mess. I couldn't stop crying. I called in a mental health day and went back to my grandmother and basically pleaded for it back. She was really sweet about it and helped me calm down. I guess I was really repressing my emotions and letting myself just enjoy the things I love. So yeah, man, no shame at all for that. Sometimes we have to return to simpler, happier times and find solace in that. Before my separation, I had a good job, and I was in university. I was miserable in my personal life, but I had a home, and I wasn't in debt. Now I'm 3 years post-separation. We were never legally married. I'm a mess. I'm in debt, broke, I can't get a job, I live on the floor at my parents' house, and I cry nonstop. I'm not sad about the relationship ending. I'm just in the worst place I've ever been in my life. I'm trying, but I have no idea how to get out of this mess. Yeah, I got divorced in my late 20s and ended up having to move back in with my parents because I was broke with no job and severely depressed. Nowadays I'm better, but still not great. Managed to get a decent job for 5 years, then they closed, and I was laid off. So now I'm working on finding a new job, but it's not going well. Parents are selling the house, so I'm going to be in a rough spot soon. Gotta keep going and keep trying. It sucks, but that's life. Story 4. I've lived a boring, non-secretive life, but my grandfather once told me a story of when he killed a man with a baseball bat for trying to rob the bar that he owned, and the regulars of the bar stashed the body somewhere and never ever talked about it again. He then put his finger to his mouth and said, "Shh, don't tell anyone." So there you go. Sorry, Gramps. That's my grandfather describing his father's adventures, terrorizing the local neighborhoods when he gets wronged. Normally, I'd think he was lying, but there are actual court documents to back up the facts. The invulnerability is a bit played up, but he did, in fact, beat up 6 people who broke his car mirror and was in fact a walking brick house. If I remember correctly, he was looking for one kid that had a record of breaking people's crap, and that one kid got a posse of 5 others together to defend him. Sounds like my cousin when he was much younger. He had a temper and was heavily built back then. There was a 2 or 3 year period where someone would look at him the wrong way and he would wind up demolishing the entire bar, usually beating up said person in the process. His brother would have to stop the fight. This was back in the days when the cops weren't called. The bar was a neighborhood place and the owner knew where he lived and would send him a bill for the damages, which were paid. He wouldn't be allowed back in for quite a while after that. There used to be a famous club in the town where I grew up that was robbed way back in the 80s. Some guy figured out that the owner would take the cash earned from the weekend home with him on Sunday nights. Anyways, this guy followed the owner home one night. The owner gets out of his car with a suitcase full of cash, and right then he gets clubbed over the back of the head with a golf club. The owner is out cold. Eventually he comes to his senses, and the money's gone. They never found the dude who did it. Turns out that guy was my uncle. He got drunk one night and just started laying out the whole scheme to me and my brother. Apparently the following Christmas my cousins were stacked with presents. Uncle doesn't feel too bad about it seems, says the owner was a bit of a prick according to him anyway. My best friend's dad and my grandpa were best friends growing up, and my friend and I are like distant cousins. I was talking to my dad once who isn't related to that side of the family. My grandpa in this story is on my mom's side, and she very rarely spoke about him and their history together. My dad, though, knows things and doesn't really mind speaking up, so one night we were talking about how hard of a life people in my town had growing up back then, how rough it could be, how rough you had to be. I'm from a small Appalachian town that's an intersection of both train routes and interstates. My dad told me that it's extremely likely my grandfather has killed a person or two in his life. My best friend's dad low-key subtly confirmed it before he died, just by telling me stories of their time together after my grandfather had passed. I never really knew that grandpa well, but the distance makes sense given all the abuse suffered back then. Could also be that my mom just didn't want me in that environment too. Story 5. When I was maybe 7-ish, I went to the grocery store with my mother. When she was checking out, I went to turn the gumball machine to see if anyone left quarters in there and didn't spin it all the way. Well, one of them was broken and I spun the sucker until my pockets were full of gumballs. When we got in the car, my mother asked what was in my pockets and I told her nothing. She still knows nothing to this day. She did, however, say if those machines were broken and you just kept turning them, that's stealing. I sure fooled her. Same age. I was at a comic book store with my mom. They also sold Boy Scout Derby car stuff, so we were here for that. I don't remember how I came across it, but I found a Pokemon card on the floor and took it. Mind you, my mom, a hardcore Christian at the time, didn't allow me to play with any of those card games. Most of you played growing up because she was so influenced by fundamentalist homeschool parents that stuff like that and Harry Potter were gateways to witchcraft. I was so happy to have something I could play at recess with. I would have gotten away with taking it, but I kept staring at it in the car. She noticed and got furious, forced me to confess how I got it, and made me return it to the store, telling me that I broke the law by stealing. If I remember correctly, the store manager just played along when I apologized. It almost certainly wasn't their property since I don't think they sold loose singles like that. It wasn't a pack that I opened up and took one card. It was probably some other kid's card that they dropped. That was a humiliating day. To make matters worse, I got a cut on my tongue from a sharp lollipop that day, and I thought God was punishing me. My little kid brain also thought stomach aches were God's reckoning and that I needed to confess my sins to absolve my pain. You just unlocked a memory for me, though it's probably my dad's secret, not mine. One of my earliest memories, my dad took me to a basketball game, high school or small college game, and as my parents did back in the day, let me just wander wherever. Found myself in the entrance tunnel and saw a gumball machine, fire alarm to you and me, on the wall. Pulled that sucker and the only thing that came out was a lot of noise and everyone from the stands. I suspect everybody knew it was me, as I'm pretty sure I was just standing in front of the thing bawling at that point. Good times, good times. Story 6. In grade 6, 1986, we were asked to write a short story during class. I wrote as much of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as I could in the hour provided. I knew it word for word. I got as far as the interior of the Vogan ship before time ran out. I did the same thing, but with The Last Airbender. We had a substitute teacher who was just an absolute fossil, and I didn't feel like actually being creative that day. She read over my work and commended me on it. It was really good, apparently. Backfired when my regular teacher was back in class the next day and asked us to read our work out loud, but I regret nothing. I was in elementary school one year, and we were supposed to write short stories. Well, one kid's short story was so good that the teacher just had to read it out loud to the class. It was just Lord of the Rings. They hadn't even tried to change the characters' names, so I piped up and said, "Hey, that's just the Lord of the Rings." My teacher promptly told me to be quiet and listen. Had an English teacher in high school who was super religious/sheltered. Really kind though and not judgmental. Was like 24 and gave loving grandma vibes. One of my classmates used Landslide as a poem. This is when the Smashing Pumpkins covered it. She was blown away. Made him read it in front of the class. None of us busted him because I think we all knew she would be hurt by being fleeced, and she was so excited about his work. I still wonder if she ever heard the song anywhere and perked up. Story 7. I have the type of OCD that makes me think I'm a pedophile. I have never touched a child and never want to. The thought of it disgusts me, but I get recurring intrusive and very unwanted thoughts about it. When I had my son, I almost gave him up for adoption because of the horrendous fear that I would hurt him somehow without realizing it. I'll look at a little girl's hair and go, "Aw, how cute," and my brain goes, "Wow, look at you, clearly a rapist. There's something really wrong with you." I was abused as a child, myself, so I think it was just a weird way my brain coped with it. To be afraid of causing that pain to someone else so much that every action is a potential sign that I am capable of hurting a child like that, it became extreme and I limited a lot of my life to try and prevent something I would never do. I didn't learn it was OCD until well into adulthood. Once I realized they were just intrusive thoughts and they didn't define who I was, it sort of lost its power over me, but I've only ever told my husband. I struggle with this too. The worst part is that I love kids. Hurting a kid is so unspeakable, and I think that those who do deserve to burn in hell. When I was in high school, I told my therapist about how I struggled with this, and she told me that intrusive thoughts often go against your most important values. For example, someone with OCD who adores animals may have intrusive thoughts about harming them. It made a lot of things make sense. That's also why intrusive thoughts are so distressing, because they fundamentally go against who you are as a person. I had the same problem when I was younger, but it stemmed from my bio father, who I'd never met, being a full-on pedophile rapist. I was terrified that it was genetic. Then I realized that I could not and would not ever intentionally harm a child in any way. It's amazing how your brain finds something so abhorrent that it will go to extreme lengths to ensure you will never be a part of that kind of abuse. I have a friend with this exact same problem, also with a history of sexual and familial abuse when they were young. She is currently on medication for it. She also constantly gets violent, intrusive thoughts about dismembering/cannibalizing random people she interacts with. It's never affected my life, but I have intrusive thoughts via OCD. My brain always thinks of the worst, most hideous things to say and do in a situation, which go around and around in my head without a break. People think OCD is just washing your hands constantly or having to touch things, but it's really not. There are so many different varieties and levels of severity. Mine is getting really intrusive thoughts and I count everything in my head. When I look at words, my brain counts all the letters and starts making rules to ensure it doesn't end on an uneven number. Everything I look at, my brain's just counting and counting and counting. I can do math in my head really quickly, but it's because of OCD. It's never affected my life, and I don't know any different, but I'm well aware it's not normal. Story 8. I farted so bad and smelly once they had to evacuate my Spanish class to search for a gas leak. I had horrible silent but deadly ones in French class once. It was awful, but my stomach was so upset, and I know if I acknowledged it at all, I would never live it down. The teacher lost it and started nearly crying and chastising whoever was doing that, saying you are sick and badly need to go to the doctor because this isn't normal. So I buckled down and didn't reveal it even worse. OMG, been there. In 7th grade, my stomach began killing me in the strangest way. Piercing pain. I let out a silent one so deadly that the teacher had to open the door and the class kept talking about it. I was so scared I would be found out. Thankfully, school let out and I was able to go home. Got rushed into emergency surgery a week later because I had E. coli and was in renal failure. They told me I would have to live on dialysis for the rest of my life, but I made a full recovery. In 1994, I was on record at the CDC as the first ever recorded person who went into renal failure from E. coli, and then my kidneys randomly began working again. I've had 3 kids and I'm 42. Still absolutely mortified reliving this incident, but my damn kidneys were failing, so I suppose I get a pass, pun intended. I had just started dating a guy and he invited me to go to the lake with him, his mom and her Boston Terrier. He always talked about how bad the dog's farts smelled. I had an upset stomach all morning and tried to cover it up as much as possible. We were sitting at the picnic table and my stomach hurt really bad. I decided to squeak a small fart out to release the pressure on my stomach and immediately regretted it. It smelled so bad, but to my relief, they yelled at the dog and shooed him away. I never told him that it was me instead of the dog. I was in the high school band. I played the trombone, so I sat in the back and we had risers, so low brass was the highest. Then down a step was trumpets and saxophones, and the lowest was flutes and clarinets. One day, I ripped a huge silent one, Normally, my farts are benign, but this one was a cancerous, toxic waste fart from hell. You can feel the heat as it leaves you. Well, it started rolling down the stairs, and first, the trumpets stopped playing. They said they couldn't breathe. The conductor got pissed that they stopped, but then it hit the clarinets, and since they were all girls, they started holding their noses and screaming. It was probably my proudest moment. Story 9. My dad had a pot pipe made of wood in the garage. I used to smoke out of it all the time because he didn't realize I knew it was there. Anyway, I didn't have a lighter one day and I used a blowtorch in the garage to smoke out of it. Completely destroyed the pipe. About 15 years later, my dad tells me about how he lost this pipe he made in his shop class in the 70s. Oops. Ha, reminds me that my mom had a pipe hanging on her wall. She had a couple of Native American decorations, and one day my brother just took it off the wall and we smoked weed out of it. He'd apparently been doing that for some time. My dad had a really old pipe too, and I used to sneak it out of the house in the middle of the night and use it to smoke weed while I walked around the neighborhood. And one night, I saw a cop and got paranoid and threw it in the bush, thinking I'd just go back for it later. But when I went back for it, I couldn't find it. He made a comment one day wondering what the hell happened to it, and I've always felt bad. Story 10. I want my dad to die. My dad is a piece of crap. He has tortured my mom and myself since childhood. He has had chondrosarcoma, bone cancer, for 4 years now. I have no remorse from him suffering from this. I'm rather angry that my family has to suffer because of it. I just hope it all comes to an end very soon so that I can live a peaceful life. It's so emotionally exhausting. So, I may be you in the future. My dad had been on death's door for 3 years and just died less than a month ago. And it was such a cathartic death. The worst problem with all of it was everyone being so sorry for your loss and trying to emotionally comfort me while I am just glad my mother won't be abused by him ever again. Fun fact from my situation, he wrote letters to be opened upon his death and I found them and assumed they might have some amount of comfort in them. The one for my mom was about what a controlling bitch she was all his life, and mine was what a disappointment I was for not listening to his guidance and treating him like I felt like I was smarter than him, among other things. So, don't think they can't hit you again from beyond the grave. Oh, look whose ashes got accidentally lost in the woods in mysterious ways. Oh, look whose grave grows toxic mushrooms totally by accident. Oh, look whose gravestone isn't readable. Oh, look whose grave is constantly pissed on by stray dogs or drunk teenagers. Maybe add some vomit. Don't underestimate your ability to be the last one to laugh. You can totally have the last hit, over and over again, and this time they're not able to defend themselves. Yeah, I think that was the thing about his personality that blew my mind. He cared way more what strangers thought of him over his flesh and blood, and we're the only ones who will remember him. I don't even care to toss ashes somewhere unpleasant. The best last word I can come up with is, I don't give a crap to even bother. Story 11. Back in the day, I would go to Walmart and Kmart and wipe the hard drives of every PC on display once every 2 to 3 weeks. I did this for a couple of years. I taught a friend to format the C prompt, and he started doing it too, and he taught a person. After a while, all the PCs on display at the mega stores for like 20 counties around us were periodically being formatted and erased. Years later, I was talking to a guy who had worked for Walmart for like 30 years, and he was telling me how someone used to format all the PCs in like 2 Walmarts he worked in. He worked in the 2 counties I frequented most. Funny thing was, they actually set up a sting operation to catch the felonious formatter, and the dude was paid overtime to walk the electronics section as a plain-clothed customer for like 3 months, and never caught the person. Even though I'm pretty sure I was still formatting the drives periodically, somehow we missed each other. For the record, I was only blowing off steam and figured that was what I was doing and was harmless shenanigans. I've never been in any kind of trouble with the law, and I didn't grow up to be a serial killer, but every now and then when I walk through a PC store, I get the itch. I guess I did this too, but I didn't actually format them. Walmart. These were Windows 95 days, so I would create a batch file, format C with some switches, that ran in MS-DOS mode. I would make the shortcut dynamite icon, I would name it "Don't click this" and put it exactly in the middle of the screen. If you started this program, it would restart the computer and run a DOS command. In this case, it would format the drive. I would do this to all computers there. I could do it within 30 seconds. Come in 2 to 3 days later and all the drives were formatted. I didn't actually format them, someone else did. I don't actually feel guilty about anything here. I made the way, but didn't actually do it. In high school, we used to BIOS lock the library computers. It wouldn't do anything until the computer was restarted and the password was required to boot. Sometimes it would go weeks without being noticed. The sysadmin hated us because they had to pull the PC apart and pull the backup battery out of the motherboard. It worked great for us because they would mark the computers out of order, and we knew the password to get in, so we essentially had reserved the computers for our own use. When I was in primary school, the school got all new computers, like Windows 95. I would have been 9 or 10 years old. There was zero security. They weren't even internet connected though. I was somewhat tech savvy for that age, as I had grown up with my dad teaching me DOS. I could competently install and boot games, etc. from CMD. Anyway, I wanted to see what you could delete and erase from C/Windows/ and still have the computer work. Started by deleting a few .dll files and rebooting. Still worked. Deleted a few more. Boom. Windows wouldn't boot. Miss, this computer isn't working. She moved us to another one. Showed my mates. Repeat. In the end, over the course of about 15 minutes, half the computers in the class wouldn't boot. The IT guy comes in very confused. My harmless version of this was that whenever they'd have demo Android phones, I'd unlock developer mode and turn on pointer location, layout bounds, and service updates. From then on, any touch leaves a trace and causes the screen to flash violently in different colors. Super easy to turn off, but it would cause someone who didn't know what happened to think the phone was broken. I figured that what I was doing was a public service. Put your devices in demo mode and don't leave them completely open and unlocked. Story 12. When I was a child, I managed to get a speech therapist fired. I was in speech classes up until high school, but this happened around 3rd or 4th grade. I don't know what her official title was, but she was not the speech teacher I would see regularly. She was an older woman, probably around her 60s. I believe she was there to examine how well the speech therapy had been going in the district. She had me read sentences with the sounds and letters I struggled with. As this was happening, she mocked me and she laughed at me while telling me I had the weakest tongue she had ever seen. As a child with a speech impediment, I was already self-conscious, but for an adult authority figure to belittle me like that, it made me never want to speak again. Once the school day was over, my mother noticed I wasn't very talkative. Eventually, I broke down and told my mom about the whole situation. She called the district and threatened legal action. We were notified soon after that the woman had been fired. There was even a phone call between my mom and the woman, where she had begged my mom for forgiveness so she could keep her job. I suppose none of this is really a secret, just something I don't talk about often. Her own actions are what led to her termination. However, secretly I do hope I ended that woman's career, as callous as that may sound. You don't mock a child, and you especially don't mock a child for something they can't control. To do so when your career has you working with children shows you're unfit for that role. This is a completely false statement. You were just a kid needing some services. She didn't do her job effectively, abused a child and got herself fired. When I was a child, I managed to get a speech therapist fired. What I mean here is that she did it to herself. There's really no excuse for her behavior. I hope it ended her career too. It's pretty destructive, honestly. Belittling people like that just encourages them not to try, and then you can't improve. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a story similar to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time!